Rotation mystery, the inconvenient truth about planet Venus and what they are trying to hide. In the Soviet Union, in the period from 1961 to 1980, extensive work was carried out on radar measurement of the distance to the bright neighbor Venus. At the same time, U.S. radio astronomers were also involved in 1967, then science was mainly still above the borders, to process the results. But when in 1970 one of the representatives of the scientific community of the former Soviet Union asked for a full report on the Venus radar, he was refused, with negative consequences for his career. So why did the Venus materials become so secret? The radar Venus was allegedly deployed to clarify the astronomical unit, the distance of the Earth from the Sun, which is, as we know, about 93 million miles, is 1 AU. But the large amount of work of almost 20 years means that its main task was elsewhere. This is also confirmed by the fact that on the basis of the research carried out, a, quote, relatively perfect theory of the motion of Venus and the Earth, end quote, and an even unified relativistic theory of the motion of the inner planets was created. However, they were not made public. At the same time, interesting information was leaked into the public domain that runs against the reference astronomical data. In the process of Venus radars, it was found that the planet's rotation period is close to 10 Earth days, although it's officially proclaimed that its rotation period going in the direction opposite to the Earth is about 243 days or 0.66 Earth years. That's why astronomers are still puzzled. Why is it that with such a slow rotation on the surface of Venus, such frenzied vortices are observed in the atmosphere of Venus? The 10 days real rotation of the planet, equal in size to the Earth, gives an unambiguous answer to the question, assuming its huge field sphere rotates according to the theory of distinction. After all, the point is that another interesting circumstance arises here. The rotation of Venus around its axis is about 2/3 years of Earth in a visually observed through a telescope period relative to the stars. The optical slowdown of rotation by more than 24 times means nothing more than a manifestation of the invisible field structure of space. In the mutual shell or mutual centric system of the world, this phenomenon is called a gravitational lens effect. It occurs due to the entrainment of Venus by the mutual solar terrestrial rotation, which twists the space field structure called dark matter. In such a way, Venus is visually thrown behind the Sun, as it were, when it shows its full phase and the smallest visible disk. In reality, Venus does not rotate around the Sun, but along its meager internal orbit with a radius of only about 0.01 astronomical units, based on the difference between its aphelion and perihelion, always opposite the Earth and the Sun, carried away by the joint rotation around the solar district center perceived by the center masses. That is why it manages to turn around its axis in just 10 Earth days. This explains the smallest of all the planets' eccentricity of the officially proclaimed heliocentric orbit of Venus. The visual lengthening of the rotation of Venus also speaks of the reality of the so-called field planetary spheres, transmitting to each other the solar and, for the outer planet's solar terrestrial moment of rotation, according to the mutually centric system of the world. The reverse rotation of the field sphere in such a common transmission chain explains the reverse rotation of Venus, the synodic resonance of Venus, or the fact that in each lower conjunction of its synodic period observed relative to the Sun, it always faces the Earth with the same part of its surface, also speaks of its movement, joint and synchronous with the solar terrestrial rotation. At the same time, the synodic period of Venus is 1.59 Earth years, which also speaks of this period as a spatial optical effect. After all, the sidereal observed by the stars period of the morning planet is 0.61 years, since it is correspondingly closer to the Sun. But the twisting of the space field structure around Venus continues even after the Earth year. The addition of sidereal period with its just forms a synodic period, but less than the resulting sum, by about 0.03 years, or just 10 Earth days. Therefore, a space-time effect is also observed when Venus actually manages to complete about 58 of its rotation during this time. At the same time, it always remains at about the same distance from both Earth and the Sun in their joint rotation, without taking into account the rotation of the Earth and Venus around their regional centers. This made it possible to clarify the astronomical unit due to the planet's radar. It turns out that Venus rotates in three realities. This is a joint movement with the Sun and Earth, in which it practically remains in place relative to the Earth, which is why synodic resonance takes place. The first reality is expressed in the recognition of astronomers that the planet rests in some of their planetary frequency funnels, and therefore the local absolute velocities of the planets are identical to zero. The second reality, in a separate rotation of Venus, is a minimum internal orbit with a diameter about 0.02 AU due to the internal position of the planet relative to the Earth. This reality is determined by the stars or by the sidereal period. The third reality of the phases of Venus observed from the Earth corresponds to its upper conjunction, or supposedly its location on the opposite side of the Sun, relative to the Earth, and determined by its synodic period. Three realities of planetary rotation because of its organization precisely by the three-phase field structure. For this reason, the 8-year trajectory of the movement of Venus across the Earth's sky is an intricate pattern of 5 loops. That is why Ptolemy urged the center of the Earth, the centers of the epicycles, inner orbits of the lower planets, Mercury and Venus, and the center of the Sun always lie on the same straight line. When Galileo obtained a good telescope, most likely from an advanced civilization, and while observing in 1610 the Venus phases, he unambiguously came to the conclusion about its separate rotation from the Sun and heliocentrism, which now turned out to be erroneous. After all, heliocentrism is a whirlpool of planets around the center of a mass or center of gravity where there is no gravity, and the drain in this whirlpool never occurs. It turns out that Ptolemy presented information from an advanced civilization that could observe Venus from space. Moreover, being high above the solar terrestrial rotation, which is still inaccessible to our civilization even now. The rotation of Venus in 3 spatial and field realities, inaccessible to modern astronomy's explanations and understanding gravity by attraction between bodies, was the reason for concealing the results of its radar. After all, the signal reflected from the planet, because of its broke up into 2 accompanying radio echoes, arriving with a corresponding delay. This means that the reality of the universe is always far from what our eyes see. And this is on Solask. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box.